I want you to stop for a moment, before the history. Before the dates and the facts and the maps. Just imagine one thing. You are at home. An ordinary morning. Your children are nearby. Your parents are close. You know every face around you. You know the name of every tree. Then strangers come with weapons, and you never will again. This happened to 12 million people. Over 400 years. And it did not happen in ancient times by people we cannot relate to. It happened in the modern world by governments, corporations, and ordinary men who kept careful financial records, attended church on Sundays, and slept soundly at night. This is the story of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and it is not comfortable. But it is necessary. How it started? It began with Portugal. In the 1440s, Portuguese sailors exploring the West African coast began capturing Africans and bringing them back to Lisbon as slaves. At first, the numbers were small. Then Spain and Portugal colonized the Americas, and everything changed. The new colonies needed labor, enormous, relentless, backbreaking labor for sugar plantations in the Caribbean, silver mines in South America, tobacco fields in North America. The colonizers tried enslaving indigenous Americans first. Disease killed them in catastrophic numbers, up to 90% of some populations, gone within decades of European contact. So they turned to Africa. The logic was coldly economic. Africa had a large population. African kingdoms had existing slave trade networks, people captured in wars who were sold to coastal traders. European goods, guns, cloth, alcohol, metal, could be traded for these captives. The triangle took shape. European ships left with manufactured goods. They arrived in West Africa and traded for enslaved people. And came the middle leg of the journey. The leg that still haunts history. The middle passage. The middle passage was the crossing from West Africa to the Americas. Weeks at sea, sometimes months. Enslaved people were packed into the hull of ships in conditions that defy description. They could not sit up. They could not turn over. They lay chained side by side in their own filth, in darkness, in heat that reached lethal temperatures. Disease swept through the ships constantly. Dysentery, smallpox, fever. The dead were unchained. From the living and thrown overboard, some people chose to jump. They preferred the ocean to the chains. Ship captains began fitting metal nets along the sides to prevent it. Perhaps 2 million people died during the middle passage alone. 2 million people who never even reached the shores of the New World. They were being taken to against their will. Those who survived arrived broken in body, but not, as the people who enslaved them would discover, broken in spirit. Life under esclave, surviving the middle passage, was not survival. It was arrival at a different kind of suffering. Enslaved people were sold at auction. Families who had survived the crossing together were separated. Husbands from wives, mothers from children, sold to different buyers, sometimes in different states, never to see each other again. The work was relentless. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean were particularly brutal, grinding physical labor in tropical heat, with death rates so high that plantation owners calculated it was cheaper to work people to death and buy new enslaved people than to keep them alive. The punishments for any resistance were designed to terrorize not just the person being punished, but every witness. And yet, they resisted anyway. Resistance that never stopped. Everywhere slavery existed, enslaved people fought back. In the ways they could, in the ways available to them. They ran away. They sabotaged crops and equipment. They practiced their religions in secret when those religions were banned. They kept their languages alive when their languages were forbidden. They sang songs that encoded information about roots, about dangers, about freedom. They revolted. In 1739, enslaved people in South Carolina rose up in the Stono Rebellion, arming themselves, marching toward Florida, where the Spanish had promised freedom. They were brutally suppressed, but they had proved that resistance was always present. In Jamaica, escaped enslaved people called Maroons built free communities in the mountains and fought the British Army to a standstill, eventually forcing the British to sign a peace treaty, recognizing their freedom. And then, in one island in the Caribbean, they won completely. The Haitian Revolution, Saint Domingue, the western portion of the island of Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, was the most profitable colony in the world in 1789. 500,000 enslaved people produced sugar and coffee that generated more wealth than all of the United States combined. Then the French Revolution happened. Liberty, equality, fraternity. The enslaved people of Saint Domingue heard those words, and they noticed that France did not mean them for everyone. In 1791, they rose up. What followed was 12 years of brutal warfare against French armies, against British armies who invaded hoping to take the colony, against Spanish forces, against yellow fever that killed European soldiers by the tens of thousands. Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved man of extraordinary military and political genius, emerged as the leader of the revolution. Napoleon eventually had him arrested through treachery and shipped to a prison in the French Alps, where he died in 1803. But the revolution did not die with him. In 1804, Haiti declared independence, the first black republic in human history, the first nation founded by formerly enslaved people. 12 years of war against the greatest military power of the age, and they won. France forced Haiti to pay reparations for the loss of its enslaved people. Haiti made those payments for over a century. The debt crippled the country. The effects are still visible today. Abolition movement to end slavery grew slowly. Quakers were among the first to call it sinful, as far back as the 1600s. By the late 1700s, writers, former enslaved people, and religious activists were building a genuine public movement. Frederick Douglass had taught himself to read in secret. He escaped slavery in Maryland and became the most powerful voice of the abolitionist movement in America, writing, speaking, traveling to Britain, demanding that the country live up to the words of its own Declaration of Independence. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833. Slaveholders were compensated. The enslaved people received nothing. America abolished slavery in 1865, after a civil war that killed 750,000 people and nearly destroyed the country. But abolition was not the end of the story, the legacy that never ended. The wealth generated by the transatlantic slave trade built the modern Western world. The port cities of Bristol and Liverpool, the financial markets of London, the insurance industry, the banks, the cotton mills of the Industrial Revolution, fed by cotton, grown by enslaved hands in American fields. Economists estimate that the unpaid labor of enslaved people in America alone represented trillions of dollars in today's money. That wealth was never returned. It built the universities, corporations, and institutions that still define Western economic power today. When slavery ended, the systems built on it did not. Segregation, sharecropping, redlining, mass incarceration. Scholars and activists have documented how, generation by generation, the economic exclusion of Black Americans was rebuilt in new legal forms after each apparent victory. 12 million people. 400 years. This is not a story from a distant, incomprehensible past. The last American enslaved people were freed in 1865. That is 5 or 6 generations ago. There are people alive today whose grandparents knew people who were enslaved. It is that recent. It is that present. understanding. It is not about guilt. It is about truth. Because you cannot understand the world you live in, its wealth, its inequalities, its politics, its unresolved tensions, without understanding how it was built. And it was built, in large part, on the forced labor of 12 million human beings who never consented, never benefited, and never forgot who they were. Neither should we.